Welcome to the True Stories of World War II podcast, where the stories are true and about World War II. I'm your host, Holden, better known on the internet as True Stories of World War II, and we're here with my good friend Tyler, better known on the internet as Wiscoworm. Hey, Tyler, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Tyler Kiel. I've been good friends with Holden for it's got to be 10, 12 years now. We grew up in the same church together. We were in the same confirmation class. Um, we hung out a decent amount through middle school and high school. Eventually, I became good friends with Holden's brother Hunter, and then I really just been following Holden's military career and when he started his Instagram page, I was just really excited about, um, seeing how a Marine could grow an Instagram page versus just a civilian like me. And he's obviously completely exceeded my growth. He's already up to 1,700 followers or something like that. And I've been sitting at 700. So it's really cool to see somebody I've grown up with and followed their career really grow their page and stuff like that. So it's cool.
Yeah, and a lot of people, once you figure out what Tyler's page is about, you're going to be like, okay, so why is he on your podcast? But no, Tyler's doing big things on Instagram too. He's just in a little bit of a different community. He's in the like the fishing and outdoors community, which honestly, like, there's a lot of parallels between like the history and firearms and military community. Obviously, there's even outdoor community members that are also members of our community. There's a guy I know that does hunting only with surplus military weapons. So
That's what I'm talking
he
about.
kind of like crosses the bridge for us. And also, I mean, Tyler's one of the few people I know, like person to person, like not from the internet, who is doing pretty big things on Instagram. So I thought it'd be cool to get somebody on here that like I didn't meet on Instagram, but
Yeah.
I got a lot of great people that are going to be on the show that I did meet on Instagram. Not knocking them at all. It's just good to get some people I know in the real physical world on here.
Yeah,
But
no,
also, Tyler's got an interest in history and metal detecting and coins and all kinds of stuff that I have an interest in. So this is going to be a really interesting podcast. I guarantee it. And the first thing I'm going to make Tyler do, that I make everybody who comes on the show do, is answer controversial World War II questions and controversial history questions. Fair warning, I gave Tyler a little bit of a hint on some of these because there's some stumpers in here. So bear with us and enjoy the show. So Tyler, the first controversial question: was the United States justified in interring Japanese civilians in World War II?
I'm just going to plainly say no, but that's from today's viewpoint. That's not my viewpoint. If I were in the height of the greatest conflict the world has ever seen and major concerns of spying, major concerns of, I don't really know, that I feel like that's the only thing. And obviously serious racism, but yeah, I think it was wrong, but I also think we can't really judge it from today's point of view at all.
All right, fair enough. Follow-up question: how do you think that it differs that the German immigrants in the United States weren't necessarily given the same treatment? Like, they weren't put in, basically, we call them internment camps to make them
Yeah.
not sound like concentration
Yeah.
camps in the United States, but that's what they really were. Is how do you feel about we really concentrated Japanese Americans, especially in California, and not so much on German Americans? I mean, they definitely faced like social persecution, like people were kind of
Yeah.
weary about them, but they weren't like interred on like of an official like federal level.
And I think being from Wisconsin, we kind of don't see the animosity towards Germans in World War II because of our huge German population. It's kind of like we're all kind of German. We all like beer and bratwurst, and we don't really see it. But I think that has more to do with the Japanese directly attacked the United States on our homeland, and we didn't, aside from U-boat sinkings and stuff that wasn't really massively covered. It wasn't like the Germans were coming here and killing our men, and so I feel like there was less hate because of that.
I think that's a fair point. I know the thing that I always get tripped up on this question when I have to answer it is, the fact that we were interring like third and fourth generation like Japanese people.
Yeah,
Like I'm like a third generation American. Like,
yeah, yeah,
it's crazy. If we were going by the same like standards and say we were gonna inter Germans, I'm a third generation American of German descent. So I don't know. I just think that's crazy to think about. But also, like you said, I mean, like we have the bias of the present, and we can look back with like
yeah.
hindsight and say, that's by modern standards, that's terrible. Note here, I'm not saying that like what they did was justified, but like it's hard to make like an accurate statement now because we're not living in the heat of the moment,
Exactly. Yeah, we're not living in the greatest conflict ever. We're not. So we can't really, I don't think we can really lay judgment on what they were thinking and what the tension was and the fears of all the people. I'm sure it was terrifying. Your your uncle, your grandpa, your dad, whatever just got slaughtered at Pearl Harbor, and now you're looking at your Japanese fellow citizens and going, man, that's kind of scary.
And I didn't really plan on talking about this when I put the question on the list, but like that general racism that was had like towards like Japanese people following the attack on Pearl Harbor, it's really similar to like a wave of racism that was seen in the US towards Muslim people following 9/11, and
Yeah.
equally not justified, but like it's very like parallel to the same kind of like situation. There was a lot of work that had to be done by like Muslim community leaders following 9/11 to kind of like explain what their beliefs exactly were and that they weren't like all extremists. And I imagine being a Japanese person after Pearl Harbor must have been like a very similar feeling.
Well, yeah, and I remember after I think it was the Boston Marathon bombing, um, it was tense. It was we'd go to concerts or whatever, and you'd see some guy acting all sketchy, and you'd be like, what's going down? Like, what the heck? This is weird, but it's fear, and whether that's justified or not, that's a whole different situation.
Yeah, it's fair enough. Well, kind of like the next controversial, it's more of a topic than a question, to be honest. Like I can't come up with a great way to turn this into a question. We're dealing with this idea that only like a small percentage of Americans or American families have really like paid the price for freedom. I guess like the best way to word it is like there's like this general idea that like only 3% of colonists fought in the war against England, and that like their ancestors and like a very small portion of Americans are really like have fought for American freedom. Have you heard this notion before? Like, does it make sense to you, or does it sound like BS?
I never actually really thought about it, but now that you say it, I'm thinking, you got the original big military families, the Jeffersons, the Washingtons, and then you have their kids and stuff who went to West Point and the Naval Academy, and it's kind of like a lineage thing and an honor type thing. My dad did it, my grandpa did it, so they get locked into it, and there's only so many that step up and do it. So I think that would be true, that only a small percentage of families have actually sent men away.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. I mean, the whole like 3% Revolutionary War thing has been like disproven because like 3% was only 3% of Americans served in like the official like U.S. Army, but there was also like huge like militia forces that weren't really
Yeah,
counted in that. So like that information has kind of been discredited as we've went on. But I also think it's true though that like there, when I was in the Marine Corps, like I was like one of like very few people I met that didn't have like an uncle or a brother or like a dad who was either in the Marine Corps like currently or like had been previously. And I think that's like really common though. Like people, like if your family's a military family, like you're going to the military, like that's like an expectation. But
Yeah.
like you'd mentioned before, we're from the Midwest, and like the Midwest has this kind of like military as a last resort kind of like view, opposed to like places like Texas where it's almost like just as valid as going to college.
Yeah. And
But
the lineage just plays so much into that. Like you said, my grandpa did it. My brother, my uncle's in the military, and um I lost my train of thought, but yeah, I would tend to think that's true. And maybe that's another thing that we don't really think of, because my grandpa served in World War II, my great grandpa, and my great uncle was in the Navy. My grandpa was in the Navy, so maybe that's something else that's kind of veiled. You don't realize that not everyone's family has people in the military.
I think that's fair. And I think like World War II was probably like the last war where you pretty much everybody has like a relative that fought in World War II. Like you'd be hard pressed, and anybody who like doesn't think they did is kind of like they just don't like really know. Like they're just that disconnected from their family history.
Yeah,
Here's another plug for do your research on your family history, and you'll be surprised what you can find.
yeah.
You might be like me, and you'll find out you had a cousin who killed a president. Stay tuned. It's coming in another podcast.
I can't wait for that one.
Uh, All right. So, the next controversial question is the use of propaganda ethical during wartime? And I want to really like focus in like is making the enemy out to look like some kind of like monster justified in wartime?
I think it has to be justified if you believe you're fighting for an ethical reason. If you're fighting an unjust war, like, I don't know, if you're fighting an unjust war, then the propaganda can't be just, can it? But like World War II, the World War II propaganda, that was just different level. Years and years of subliminal messaging and um, pumping up American spirit, and that still hangs around today, in the history books, and that it kind of instills an American feeling, I guess, of we're better than everybody. And is that ethical? I would say in the case of World War II it is, but um, in other places maybe not.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't. People who follow the page, we've been doing a weekly study of World War II and World War One propaganda, especially some of like the lesser known stuff. And you can't really get a feel for it on my page because I haven't posted any crazy racist propaganda, but there's a
Yeah,
lot of crazy racist propaganda from that time frame. The way that the U.S. portrayed Japanese people was like less than human, and it really has to do with like the whole like message we were giving our troops is that the Japanese people like they weren't as strong as like a white person. So there's a lot of like really like racist like undertows to this stuff, but like the propaganda wasn't subtle at all. Like it made people out to look very inhuman, and to a lesser extent that like happened in Germany too. Um, like the really like racist German propaganda though tends to be from World War One. Like there's like this like trend of like making Germans look like apes, and
yeah, and I think the Axis powers in World War I were made out way worse and individually targeted on, again, lineage, where you're from. It was more, it's Germany, it's Poland, it's you know these countries versus our country. It's not we're fighting the Axis powers.
right. I don't want to make it sound like Americans are the only ones that have used propaganda. I mean,
Not at all.
Germans like very notoriously had a lot of like anti-Jewish propaganda, even before like the Holocaust and stuff. And the Japanese like really nailed Americans with propaganda too, especially like to like locals on islands, as like America was like taking over the islands in our island hopping campaign getting towards mainland Japan. Like the Japanese army was distributing propaganda to like the local islanders that basically said like you got to fight to the death, because if the Americans capture you, they're going to kill you and eat you and rape
Yeah.
women and children. And so it's definitely not like an American only thing,
No, not at all.
but I don't know. It's kind of like looking back at the stuff though now, it seems like so crazy racist. It's insane. But
Well, yeah, and everything's so whitewashed now. You could never say we went to another major war in the Middle East. You would never find, posters of Arab men saying savages or whatever, or Krauts, or that was the big one for the Germans, I think, the Krauts.
yeah. Well, it's always kind of funny, like you seeing like this imagery against the Germans, because like Germans are just like like run of the mill Europeans. Like to me, they look like other Europeans. Like they're white,
Mm-hmm.
they're white, like
Yeah,
pretty like pale complexion. Like they look like almost any like Scandinavians. So like when like the U.S. is making like propaganda against Germans, it's like they look just like the majority of white people in America. Like it's
because we're big German population. That's what it is.
yeah, the U.S. like other than English, German is like one of like the highest like traceable ancestry groups. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, through my genealogical research, I have found that there is more people of German descent in the U.S. than there is in Germany, which is
That's,
pretty
I
nuts,
guess
right?
that's surprising. Yeah.
But when you think about it, it's not that crazy considering the Germany is about the size of Wisconsin,
Yeah.
so it doesn't have that big of a population. And as we've been learning from genealogy, like population is like exponential.
Mm-hmm.
So like as you like one person who came over from Germany like 3 generations ago could have like 60 descendants in the U.S. So
Yeah.
it's pretty nuts. I don't know. We were just having this discussion that like if you go back 12 generations, you'd have 12 uh at 12 generations you'd have 8,192 grandparents.
That's 8,192.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah, because for every generation, like you double your amount of
Oh,
grandparents.
I guess, yeah.
So like you have four grandparents, 8 great grandparents, 16 great grandparents, and like as you go up the chain, like it just
It's
gets
just, yeah.
exponentially larger. So when people are doing genealogy and they're like, my eighth great grandfather came over from France.
Which one?
Well, you had 512
Yeah.
eighth great grandparents, so half of those were great grandfathers.
Yeah.
That's why genealogy is so tricky, because I mean it gets pretty nuts, like there's a lot of people
Yeah.
in a family tree. Like my current family tree, I'm at like over 1,000 people, and like that's like hard to even keep track on like a program, let alone like in your head.
Yeah. And there's no way. I mean, I can remember maybe back, it'd be 1, 2, 3, like 4 or 5 generations. I can remember quite a few. But other than that, it's like, what? Who are these people? How am
Yeah,
I even related to them?
right. And then like you run into the issue where I've been running into, like my on my mom's side, her grandparents, like they came from families of like 10 kids. Like how do you keep track of that? Like if
And how,
each
yeah,
of those 10 kids had 10 kids, that's like 100 first cousins to my
yeah,
mom.
that's,
Obviously they didn't, but like that's just insane. Like it's
yeah.
exponentially.
Well, and
Yeah.
then you talk about the baby boom where everyone did have 10 kids.
Yeah, I don't, there was a like I don't want to generalize, but like on my family, if whenever there's 10 kids like in a family, they're always like Catholics from Poland. But
Yeah.
like there was a lot of like be fruitful and prosper, have a lot of kids, and there was no internet, there was nothing else to do, so it is what
Yeah, that's true.
it is. All right, I want to get into our next controversial issue. We talked about this one a little bit before the show, because it probably is the most controversial thing on this list here, and was the bombing of Dresden in 1945 in Germany justified? What do you think, Tyler?
I actually never heard about this until Holden softball the question to me. So I did quite a bit of reading on the topic, and from what I read, there was a significant civilian loss, which that's wrong. Obviously, you shouldn't target civilians, but it was also, based on what I read, strategically a major railway hub, and the American forces, from what they say, again, this could be another propaganda thing, we only targeted industrial sites, and then the British one bombing run or whatever it was, 1,800 tons of bombs that directly targeted residential areas. But I'm gonna say yeah, especially towards the end of the war there, where everything's grinding down and they're putting all of their every resource they have and funneling it through these certain areas. I would say taking out a big railway hub like that would be really major strategically.
All right. So before I give you my opinion on this one, I just want to lay out some information. Um, Basically, the United States claims that between 22,700 and 25,000 people were killed during the bombings in Dresden, while the Germans have claimed that anywhere between about 200,000 and 500,000 people were killed. And the important thing to note here is that the area was largely serving as like a POW camp and like a refugee camp at the time. So like people from all these other bombed out areas in Germany, as you mentioned, we're nearing the end of the war here. Germany's kind of a mess, right? So all these people that they're bombed out of their homes, they're kind of like flocking to Dresden. So there's not really like an accurate like count of people going on. Like there's not like a census, right? Um, so it's really hard to tell how many people actually died at Dresden. I want to make that point clear. Is like I don't know if 22,000 people died or 500,000 people died. It's probably somewhere closer to about 100,000. I mean, I'd imagine there was a lot more than the U.S. says, but it wasn't 500,000. Like I just want to be there somewhere. Also, like there when we're talking about these industrial centers that got bombed, it's important to note like by the end of the war, like the Germans had like almost like totally resorted to like slave labor for production. So like these like industrial centers were full of slaves basically.
Yeah.
So when we bombed the infrastructure, but we were also bombing like civilians. So that's where like a lot of people have objections to the bombing of Dresden, and it's not quite as popularly known as the bombings that took place at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, like in like the general public, but like within like the history community, like they're almost like comparable events because like when you're talking about the populations that died, it's similar, and there's like the same kind of like, was it really like necessary, was it justified? As you're saying, the war is wrapping up, do we really need like this huge like civilian casualties? There's also the people who are talking about, yeah, we bombed like these essential railways, but we never bombed railways leading to like Auschwitz ever
Hmm.
in the entire war.
Yeah.
So
Well,
my
they didn't want to take out prisoners.
right. So my personal opinion is like I'd like to believe the United States didn't quite understand what was going on in Dresden. Like I'd like as much as like a conspiracy theorist I am, like I'd really like to believe that the US did not know like the level of like refugees that had gathered there, or the fact that they were holding US POWs in Dresden, or that slave labor was being employed in factories. But at the end of the day, like if they had that information, I want to say it wasn't justified.
Yeah, and I just want to say that no matter if it's 22,700 or 500,000 civilians, I think that's wrong. Collateral damage is not cool in my opinion, especially the fire bombings in Tokyo, the atomic bomb droppings. I think that it was very wrong, but I think it was also much needed.
Yeah. Yeah, and like we've talked about in other subjects, and then I've talked about in other podcasts. I mean, it's really hard to play what if, because you
Yeah,
get into this dangerous game with history. What if this would have happened? Well, we don't know because it didn't happen. So
yeah. There's no
so
why even go
speculation,
there.
yeah, so speculation is almost useless. Like you can be like, well, I wish it didn't happen, but like that's about it. Like you can't really like well, if this happened and this happened, because we don't know. I mean, like even like today, like the military runs like simulations on computers, like changing variables on stuff, and like it's still like it leaves out that whole like human element. Like we don't know what's gonna happen until it
Yeah.
actually happens.
No,
So
and there's yeah. So I'll say that it was justified, but I'll say that I do condemn the civilian loss. I don't think that's
yeah, yeah, I want to make that clear every time we talk about civilian loss on the podcast. Is like I don't think that anybody who's not wearing a uniform should ever die in war, and I don't think that like we should continue to fight wars. Period. Like I'd rather like not kill people at all. So
yeah, that's
that's
that's true. But then when you talk about what the atrocities that Germany was committing, it's something had to be done.
yeah, and that's why we're still talking about it 75 years later. Is because
Yeah.
there's not a clear answer on this stuff, and that's
Yeah.
why they're controversial topics and why we can't talk about them on Instagram, where we
Yeah.
are end up
Yeah.
serving bans.
Catch the shadow ban.
Catch the shadow ban. I don't really want to get too far into that. But like if you're listening at this point in the podcast, you're probably a pretty like regular person, a regular follower and engaged on my post on my page. I'm going to be taking a little bit of an unexpected vacation from Instagram. Currently serving a 7-day ban for liking too many posts. So that's great. I've put my appeal into Instagram. I don't think anything's going to happen. Stay tuned. I'm going to have Old Mauser Man on the podcast in the next couple days, and we're going to talk about his experience with Instagram. He sent them a letter complaining about his ban, and they returned it to sender. So we're going to talk about that in an upcoming podcast. But let's get back to these controversial topics. So my last controversial topic for you, Tyler, is should controversial topics like these and many others be taught in schools?
100%. Because I just want to say I had no idea about the bombing of Dresden. No idea. And now I do. And that's something again to do with propaganda and whitewashing, I guess, of what wrong the U.S. did in previous wars and what wrong that U.S. leaders did in previous wars, and people who were so fueled with propaganda that they're basically um, what's the word I'm looking for? Set in stone, kind of, I guess, as heroic, even though they were humans and they did some bad things too.
That's fair enough, and this is something I'm like really passionate about because one, I'm like a history major and I love history and like I do this professionally now.
Yeah,
But like two, I'm gonna be a teacher, so like thinking about how to like approach some of this stuff is gonna be like a really real issue in my life at some point in the near future. So like I think about this stuff a lot. Like particularly like I took a class on like Native American history and like culture and religion, and like I wasn't like particularly like excited about taking the class because I didn't know anything about Native American culture, which is crazy now. Like looking back, like how did I go to school and live in the United States for 23 years before I learned like anything about Native Americans?
yeah,
Which
about the people that lived here first. It's crazy.
And I mean, I don't remember anything more than like, yeah, there was also Native Americans here. Like that was like my history
Yeah,
education. Like there was just nothing more than
well,
that.
especially the early stuff. I mean, they cover, the Trail of Tears and Wounded Knee and stuff like in the Battle of Custer, but they don't get into, the massive numbers of natives that were killed, and they do that for a reason to make the government seem trustworthy, to seem like the U.S. is better than other countries.
Yeah, and like there's people that'll defend not teaching about Native American history in school because they say like, how do you teach young kids about genocide? And the problem is like we teach about the Holocaust in like maybe 7th grade, like at the latest. Like I
Yeah,
don't wouldn't that be a perfect time to be like, hey, we also had this thing that was pretty similar that took place in the United States?
Yeah.
It can be argued how many like Native Americans were actually like systematically murdered, but like the way that the disease ripped through the country and killed it like 90% of a population, whether or not it was like intentional, like um, could be like debated to some degree, but like it was like a genocide on American
Oh yeah,
soil.
absolutely.
There's even like, I don't want to call it pseudo history, but like alternate opinions on history where there's like Native American historians that claim like the Native American population in the United States was closer to like a billion people, and like
And that
999 million of them died after encounter with Americans. I don't like, I'm not saying that's true, but there's even like different opinions to what like little we do get taught in school.
well,
um,
and I'm sure that's another case of, the US bad, Native Americans good, whatever it is. It's all propaganda, I guess, in history. There's a lot of use of propaganda.
yeah, and it's very we've really romanticized US history. Like, I don't it's starting to come out, like the things like Thomas Jefferson had slaves and probably had like slave children, or
Yeah.
or children with his slaves. But like for like centuries, like 200 years, like these people, like we've just been building them up as like almost like gods. I mean, like,
Yeah, yeah.
you don't look at George Washington like a person that actually lived anymore. That's
No, yeah, it's just he's the hero. He started the country, but they're bad people too. I mean, not
Yeah,
bad people. They also, started the greatest country on earth, but
yeah. And I think it's a lot of people like to like they like to dig on the founding fathers for just for like owning slaves. And I'm like, I don't like agree with slavery at all, like as a practice, but like so many people like at that period did, where like it's almost like a given. If you're looking for a reason to like hate somebody from that time period, you're like, yeah, you own slaves. Well, like so did all these other people. So you got to
yeah.
like dig a little more. But like it's not that hard with people like George Washington. Like he married his wife because she had money, and women
Hmm.
couldn't own property at the time, so he married her and like inherited like a huge estate. Um, yeah, like
Was that Washington or Jefferson?
Washington.
Okay.
But yeah, and these people, they're not what we build them up to be. And like they're like anybody else. They were people with all kinds of like crazy flaws. Like it's tough now. Like people like Alexander Hamilton died in a duel.
Yeah,
like
that's savage though.
like he had some stuff going on. Like he wasn't perfect.
The Secret Service would never
like like can you
pass.
imagine, like, if I think he was like, I don't know if he was currently the Secretary of the Treasury at that point, or like he was the past. He was one of the first cabinet members. He was George Washington's like right hand man throughout the Revolutionary War. This dude dies in a duel with Aaron Burr. Like that's
Yeah,
just like.
with a common man basically. Just, you know what? I don't like you. I'm gonna shoot at you, and if you hit me, well, it's over.
But to like get back to the question, it's like
Yeah.
I really think this stuff should be taught in school, like the controversial history. Like, I don't think we should be making the U.S. out to be like perfect, and I think it's dangerous. Like, it really feeds into like people not understanding history, like, and I don't know that we have like a great like system right now to like teach like these alternate opinions, or like it's not even like alternate opinions as much as it is like the entire story, right? Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just it's just like the parts we don't want to talk about. Like it's like when you were growing up and like you had this like crazy like time with your friends, and you told your parents about like, yeah, we went and saw a movie, but like really like you're just wandering around a bad neighborhood. like
Yeah.
like you left that part out, right?
Yeah.
Like that's like the entirety of US history. Like they left out the part where you were like bumming around with your hood rat friends. Like
Yeah. We left out the whole genocide thing, and also the really pushing bordering war crime bombings and stuff, but we're good. We're good.
yeah.
No, I think it should be taught though too, because
This is
there's
yeah. This is your weekly reminder that Ronald Reagan was a convicted war criminal, and we currently have an airport named after him in our nation's capital. The more you know, kids. All right, and with that, I would like to get into yourself, Tyler. So, we've been talking about a lot about genealogy in this podcast, and I have been on my page for the last couple months. What is your family's genealogy like? Do you have any war heroes in your family? Any military veterans?
I don't think I have any combat. I'm sure my great grandpa saw combat being in North Africa and
That's pretty
France and
sweet.
Italy. Um, I never met him, so I never heard any stories, and I don't know if he ever told anybody that. I don't know if that was a thing back in the day. I don't think it was. You wouldn't. That was something you didn't talk about really. But yeah. So my great grandpa was in the army, and he was in North Africa, France, and Italy, and my great uncle was in the Navy. My grandpa was in the Navy. Um, my first cousin's father is in the Air Force currently. He's chief of security or head of security at Air Force Base in Montana. Um, my dad was rejected from the Coast Guard for his fallen arches.
Your dad's a career police officer, and that's pretty. That's serving in a different way. So
Yeah, he was going to be in the Montana State Patrol, and now he's worked his way up to be assistant chief here in my hometown, Superior. So, um, yeah, but in terms of military history, that's really the only guy that saw combat would be my great grandpa. But then, my family runs through Milwaukee, heavily in Milwaukee, which again, big German population, big Western European population. Um, yeah, so I think I would be a fourth or fifth generation American then.
yeah, my like generation count is a little messed up because like I have family that's been in the US since like the 1640s and family who's been in the US since like the 1920s. So there's like a real like there's a discrepancy there. Like on one side like I'm like 13th generation American and on one side I'm like third generation American.
Oh, that's a guy I just remembered. My grandpa Frederick fought for Austria in World War One, and he was bayoneted in the Argonne Forest twice on two different trips to the front line. So he was bayoneted, came back home, and he was living in America and fighting for Austria.
You know what? You want to hear a crazy one? I know we're talking about your family history, but so I got caught up on my great great grandfather. He was a immigrant to the U.S. and they immigrated in 1929. So they were like my last ancestors that come over from another country. But like I couldn't find anything about him or his like parents before he came over from Germany. But I got my hands on the 1930 census, right? And like on the 1930 census it's a very unique census. It's the only one that had an option to check like whether or not you were a veteran in that time period. Like the 1941 didn't, 1920 didn't, and he had checked he was a veteran of World War One in 1930, and he hadn't come to the U.S. until 1929. So not a mathematician, but he wasn't a veteran for the United States.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, that's fine
eventually
though.
eventually I tracked down his obituary, and he fought for Germany in World War One, which is kind of crazy because his son-in-law would go on to fight in Germany for the U.S. in World War Two. So the more you
Civil War
know.
type stuff.
Yeah, but
Family versus family.
yeah, I don't know. We haven't talked too much about like crazy like Nazi family relations on this podcast yet, but we'll get there.
Yeah,
I
you just
have
gotta find somebody.
I have some realizations that I found out recently that I don't know how to like comfortably worm into like like an Instagram post. Like
Yeah.
I talked about my distant cousin who killed a president, but I really haven't been able to like work in how I got a couple great uncles who are Nazis. But we'll get there, right? Like we're working around like a big circle. We got to ease into that.
And there it is.
So, all right. So kind of like we've already kind of been into like what some of your interests are, but like what are like your main interests in history? I know you're a big history guy.
In history, I'd say Western Europe. I'm just obsessed with Western Europe. You know, the Slavic countries,
That's
or
Eastern Europe.
Eastern Europe. Excuse me, I said Eastern earlier too. The Slavic countries. I think a lot of my family is from um, the Czech Republic area. Those countries. So in Milwaukee, we have it's just you know World War II, Milwaukee history. I love the history of brewing and beer making in Wisconsin. I love reading about the Miller family, the Leinenkugel family. The history of Pabst Blue Ribbon, the history of Schlitz and all the old brewing companies in Milwaukee. That's something I'm really big into. And then obviously turn of the century military coins, stuff like that.
I didn't have this on my like list, but it was something I've been meaning to ask you about because one of the things that it got me thinking like, hey, I got to get Tyler on here is like you posted that you found a silver dime, barber dime metal detecting on your Instagram page recently. So you're into metal detecting? I got a lot of followers and listeners who are really into metal detecting.
Yeah, so I think I got my first metal detector for my 8th or ninth birthday from my parents, and I'd search everywhere. We had my old home was 1917 or something, and we'd search around out in the yard and find old caps to milk jugs and stuff, and I've been searching ever since I was 8 or 9 for my first silver coin. And I went swimming at the river with my girlfriend, and I'm walking across the shallow part, and I look down, and jammed into the rock, I see a coin, and I'm like, oh, a quarter or whatever. I lean down and pick it up, and I check the date, and I think it was a 1917
Yeah.
quarter, and that was my first silver coin. So I was like, oh man, I wanted to dig it up.
Yeah, I feel like I've been like in and out of metal detecting like over the years. I think I've had one like a metal detector for like 10 years, maybe longer, maybe like 12 years. But I was really into it for a while. Like I think I found like 5 or 6 silver coins and some other stuff, and I kind of got out of it for a while. Like obviously while I was in the military, like it really wasn't like feasible, especially like when
Yeah.
I was overseas. And like now I live in the middle of the city, and like there's really nowhere to metal
Hey,
detect.
there is beautiful places in Minneapolis. You find those old apartment buildings and the old
Yeah.
with townhome complexes. Nobody's hit those yards in the big cities.
Yeah, I honestly like where I live. There is like 30 feet of grass within like half a mile. Like,
Hey, that dig through the concrete, man. Don't be a baby.
but yeah, I just had to get your 2 cents. There you go.
Aha.
On metal detecting because I know there's people out there that really enjoy it.
Oh
Um,
yeah, it's a good hobby, but it does take a lot of commitment to, especially to find good finds like that. And that's probably why I never found a silver coin, because I wasn't checking spots that people hadn't already checked.
Fair enough. So we haven't really got into your Instagram world yet. Your following, and like we discussed like there's not like a great transition into this other than like Tyler is a friend of mine who's really into history who also operates a very successful Instagram presence, but it's a fishing page and it's a little different. Can you want to like pitch your page, like pretend like this is like the Shark Tank and you're trying to sell me
I'm
your
trying to
Instagram?
sell the page so I can
Yeah.
gain some followers, all the
Yeah.
stream listeners. All right. So basically what I post is my fishing pictures. I post pictures of going out fishing with me, my dad, my cousins, my grandpa, my girlfriend. And just recently I started making soft plastic baits, and I post pictures of that. But really it's just about being outdoors. The whole account is just, being in nature, getting out on the water, getting out in the woods. And for me, I don't, I'm terrible at fishing, but I just love being out there. I'm absolutely garbage at fishing, and I'll be the first to admit that. But um, I love being out in the woods, and I love seeing animals, and I love being on the water more than anything. I love looking down into creeks and the clear lakes of northern Wisconsin. And yeah, that's basically what my page is. And I make a YouTube video every once in a while, but
Man, I was just thinking about this. I got to get you hooked up with my boot camp buddy, Max Wilson. He's on the Walleye tour. Uh,
okay.
uh, he's won a bunch of awards over the years, but he is a Marine Corps reservist. But we went through like combat training together. But he's like a professional fisherman, but like on with the Marine Corps on the weekends, like if that makes
Yeah,
any sense. But he's kind of a big deal in the fishing world. It'd be kind of cool to get him on here actually. But like
yeah, that's
I
cool.
should hook him up with you. He's
Yeah, send him over to the page so he can laugh at how sparsely I catch fish.
I don't know. Probably he's a good relationship to have. Let's see. So, what are your goals of your Instagram page? I really like your laid back thing you got going on your Instagram. It always looks like you're having fun. I mean, people come to my page like they get a history lesson, but it's not always like I can't tell if this guy is having fun. Like there's a lot of research that goes into it. I enjoy what I do, but it's not always like afternoon on the boat fishing.
Yeah, and that's part of it. I love the making the content that I post, even though I don't make a lot of content, but I do try my best. I just don't have a consistent posting schedule, so I'm
Hey, don't worry
unselling my
about
page.
that. Don't worry about that. I had a great posting schedule before I got banned for a week on
Hey,
Instagram.
I need to get banned.
That'll give you an excuse not to post for a week, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I haven't been posting because I'll just say I'm banned.
Don't worry. I'm just gonna I'll report you for talking about the Holocaust and you'll get banned. So
There we go. No, but
this is exactly why I'll never get any sponsors because I can't go 10 minutes without mentioning the
here's the
Holocaust.
sponsor.
It's Modelo time. All right. If anybody listening wants to sponsor us, I will shout you out for $1 on the podcast. I'll put your logo on here for $1. All right. You can be
Anywhere you want.
because I have personally been sponsoring my own Instagram page and it's getting expensive. So if anybody wants to support our content, you let me know.
And you should support Holden's content because a Marine making Instagram content is the most reliable thing you could ever think of. The posts come through every day.
They
They're
do.
always
I
they're
had over 6 months to post before this little hiccup.
that's fine. You'll be back. And no, but the timeliness of your posts, and it's always a great story. Your captions are fantastic, and I love it.
All right. We kind of got into all the questions I really had about your page. Like, where can we find you? I noticed that you have an Instagram, but what's your YouTube handle?
My YouTube is Ultralight Trophies, and that is kind of my old brand. I switched over from just posting fishing and just posting ultralight fishing, and I've moved into I'm making my own baits now. So we kind of rebranded, and yeah, I'm Wiscoworm on Instagram and Ultralight Trophies on YouTube.
Okay, I'll try to remember to get that in the description of the video when it comes up here. Uh, so people that are still listening, we're kind of wrapping things up here. I know towards the end of the videos, I can tell that there's really not that many people still listening, but I just kind of want to give a rundown of who I've got on the schedule coming up here. So Black Sheep, everybody knows him. He's one of my old buddies and partners on Instagram. We used to do a lot of work together. We haven't done so much lately, but he's coming up on an upcoming podcast here. Old Mauser, man. A lot of people are looking forward to that. He's got 40,000 followers.
That's me. I'm ready for that one.
We're gonna talk about his battle with Instagram. Really, I'm currently battling Instagram, but Old Mauser, man, he's been at bat with them for a while. We're gonna talk about his. He posted some really cool Third Reich Christmas tree ornaments, I guess is the best way to explain them. They may have had a hooked cross on them. They might not have. I don't really remember. But Instagram took it down. It was a really popular post. He sent Instagram a letter about it, and they sent it back to him without even opening it. So we're going to talk about that and the struggle we have with posting historical content on Instagram. Other than that, we have Surplus and stuff coming up. He's a really great dude on Instagram. And also Milcert Mariner. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. He keeps changing his name, so I grill him for that all the time. But we're going to talk about why Milcert Mariner keeps changing his name. He was originally Surplus Boogaloo. I can't remember his last name. It might have been Milcert Surplus or something like that. The dude keeps changing names on me, but you'll know him when I got him on the podcast. He's a really great dude too. Doing some great stuff on Instagram. He's really into the old Surplus rifles like me. That's about it right now, but by the time I make this next video, I'm sure I'll have more people lined up. It doesn't seem like there's any shortage of people that want to get on a podcast, and there doesn't seem to be that many podcasts in our little community going on, so this might be your best opportunity right now. Not saying I'm the best host yet, but we're working on it.
This is the best podcast I've been on. I'm just saying.
This is my first and best podcast that I've
ever. I would recommend it.
Well, this is my second one hosting and like third ever. So I'm working on selling the podcast, but not really selling it as much as I am trying to get some bigger like indie history podcast sites that collect all these small little history podcasts to like post our content, so it'll be out there more with other stuff that's similar, and I'm not gonna have to work so hard to like distribute it, which would be nice, because that's how I got banned, is trying to distribute content. Basically is liking posts, try to get people to come to the page and check our stuff out. So we got to look at some alternate ways of like distributing this message that's not going to get my account banned and then I don't need to pay for, because like I mentioned, all this great Instagram stuff I've been doing is out of pocket. And if you're looking for a way to financially support this page, we have stickers for sale still. Hit me up in the DMs if you'd like to buy some True Stories or World War II stickers. Otherwise, I'm working on some other merch, but it might be a little while because the stuff's not free to get started, and it's out of pocket. This is my business. It's what I do for a living, so bear with me. Tyler, you got anything you want to say? Any closing remarks?
I just want to say I'm excited to watch your podcast and your Instagram account grow more. I've absolutely loved watching your account grow from the time you got out of the military until now. I think it's really impressive growth, and you post the best Instagram content. It's always a good story and a good caption and something to ponder about every time. So definitely keep following True Stories of World War II.
Tyler, I really appreciate your kind words. You taking the time out of the day to come on here and talk history with me. I'd love to have you back in a couple weeks, couple months, once things have grown a little bit and once we've kind of hammered out all the details here, and we can be like, man, remember that first one we did? Like, that was crap. So
definitely.
All right. Everybody else that's still listening here at the end of the podcast, appreciate you. Check me out on Instagram. Check Tyler out on Instagram and YouTube. And peace.